I've raised millions for conservation, but it still wasn't saving enough wildlife. And I've realised it's the laws of land that are the problem.
Landowners should be part of the solution to the conservation issue, not the cause of the problem.
The United Nations brought out a report this year that said we are at the tipping point. We are now killing off species at such a fast rate that we are now at danger of complete and utter collapse of all ecosystems throughout the world.
We humans are killing species all over the world, and the United Nations warns us that that destruction, the extinction of other life forms, is actually undermining the basis of our human existence. I've come to Wildwood, a nature conservation trust in Kent in England, to talk to Peter Smith. He's devoted his life to trying to rescue those threatened species.
Fred!
Hello, Peter.
Oh, welcome to Wildwood.
We want to tell everyone about British wildlife, the story of British wildlife. So we've brought together a number of animals from our past and our present so other people can discover them.
So we have just brought in some European bison, which are fantastic creatures, an extinct British species. And these are the biggest land mammal in Europe. And they're browsing animals. They live in the forests, and they're an important part of any forest ecosystem because bison can push down a tree here and there, and that creates a little woodland glade where rare butterflies and birds can live. These beautiful creatures are called conic ponies, and they're the last of the truly wild European horse. The ancestors of these creatures ran wild across all of Britain's woodlands and wetlands, and they were part of our ecosystem. And they were hunted to extinction 100 years ago. But a few animals had crossed with these conic ponies, and these are the genes that are left. And we are introducing these back to nature reserves across the southeast so they can once again run wild and free.
So, Peter, you're literally turning this into an educational establishment for children so that they can learn about nature. In fact, you're creating a walkway through the trees for them.
That's right. We've got a playground, and we want to allow children to walk through the trees and see the amazing relationships between things like ants and oak trees and all the other trees. They can get in there and be part of it. Hey, look, we've got some lynx just in front of us there. Amazing, aren't they?
The lynx were driven to extinction because people wanted the land and...
That's right. The lynx need 50 square miles at least to live, and that has to be their type of habitat. Once people started coming in and hunting all their prey, roe deer, and changing the land, farming the land, that changed how the lynx could live. Humans only needed to kill a few of these to wipe them out. They were a fragile species, ecologically speaking, lived very far apart, so it only took a little impact from man to wipe these out.
But you can't hope to put the lynx back into the wild other than in Wildwood, I take it.
Well, we can, and there's no problem. In fact, Scottish Wildlife Trust want lynx to be reintroduced because lynx do a wonderful thing. They will help spread out the population of deer. At the moment, we've got lots of deer that concentrate in areas, eating all the leaves, the little growth of new trees, so nothing can regrow properly. You need to have predators, prey, and all the trees and the grasses in harmony with each other, and that's what lynx bring, because they live in very low densities. It's easy. If we just kill a few, they'll go extinct because then they can't meet each other and breed.
So, why is it important for Wildwood and other nature reserves to help children to understand life in the wild?
We want wildlife to be something they can experience and understand it's nothing to be scared of. You know, wildlife is not a lion that's dangerous. Wildlife is something that's all around us, and we can exist and coexist with wildlife, and it's something we should have back in our lives, not something to be separate. Wildwood's got teams of people who volunteers, so we serve a social function, helping people discover skills and feel part of the community. We were fed up of spending huge amounts of money and time and effort to manage nature reserves, when beaver and wild horses and other wild grazing animals could do a far better job. And that's what we've built at Wildwood, a way of conserving nature that doesn't cost the taxpayer or private donors a lot of money. It's about people being able to see the wildlife like it was in a woodland 1,000 years ago, so they can chance upon a wolf, a wild boar, a lynx, and feel part of it.
Is there anything we can learn from nature that teaches us how to live in harmony with our ecosystems?
The beaver's a perfect animal for us to learn about nature. It creates balance and harmony. European beaver here are an essential part of Britain's waterways. Bringing beaver back to Britain is one of the most important things we can do. Beavers will get rid of pollutants, nitrates, phosphates that farmers put on their field. They'll absorb floodwaters that would have flooded our cities. The beaver wetland's a giant sponge, sucks it all the water in, and then it saves our cities from flooding. We're faced with challenges because a beaver will occupy a riverbank. Now those landowners say, I want all of my profit that I'd had on my land, I want that from the government before we let beavers back.
So these wetlands are really important because we're seeing increasingly floods, rivers breaking their banks and causing havoc in towns.
In the past, the waters would flood out into fields as it goes down the river. These are our floodplains. And farmers wanting to farm the land along rivers have created flood defences, and the taxpayer has assisted in this process as well, to the tune of many tens of millions of pounds a year. This little chap here, he's the water vole. Because we use rivers as drainage channels, and they're not allowed to meander and create little oxbow lakes and have reed beds, these lovely creatures have virtually gone extinct. And the taxpayer did that. We fund the Environment Agency to spend a huge amount of money stopping the rivers working naturally. Conservation organisations then have to pay people to recreate those lost habitats, and we are spending millions of pounds a year, wildlife trusts, RSPB, in creating water vole habitats, and Wildwood here, as the country's expert breeders of water voles, are breeding them up and returning them to these new nature reserves.
The Common Agricultural Policy in Europe devotes 40% of the European Union budget to agriculture. Does that have a beneficial impact on the environment? By
Subsidising intensive agriculture, we ripped out woodlands and beautiful natural grasslands, downlands. They were destroyed in droves since the 50s, and that was directly down to the subsidising, the false subsidising of crops. Common agricultural policy has been a disaster for British wildlife. To protect landowners, to allow landowners to earn lots of money, we have taxed everybody in Europe, used that tax of hard-working people to give to the landowners that's then been used to destroy wildlife.
Isn't there a connection between the land ownership system and the way human communities were also negatively affected back in history?
If we go back to Henry VIII, he started the process of the Enclosures Act. Found out the Enclosures Act were when quite wealthy people, they were able to take away common land from normal people and monopolise it for their own use. But they wanted all the wildlife to go as well. And that's how a lot of our wildlife, our wolves, our lynx, our bears, they all went extinct because there was an economic imperative. There was a bounty on wolves to be shot. With newly made firearms, they shot the wolves and they forced them to extinction in this country. The big bad wolf didn't exist until we wanted to make them extinct. It's because we kicked all the peasants off the land, and then big landowners started farming sheep for wool. And then they sold that wool across Europe. That was the start of our industrial revolution. And it was done at the expense of normal people and wolves.
So it was this same property rights in land which victimized humans and our fellow species.
I've raised millions for conservation, but it still wasn't saving enough wildlife. And I've realized it's the laws of land that are the problem. Every time we try to save wildlife on land, the people who own land can charge more for it. If we try to buy nature reserves, or if we try to get government control on land, landowners always seem to win. They can't seem to lose financially in the system.
So you're saying that landowners are cashing in on the current awareness that we are extinguishing whole species on this planet?
Landowners aren't silly. They know what's happening in the conservation environment. I might have £5 million to buy some land, but all that means is the nature reserve is going to cost 20 times as much. So the price just keeps on going up and up and up, no matter how much money we raise.
What is the alternative?
The journey of discovery I've gone on is to try and understand economics. And this is where I started discovering the ideas of taxing land instead of taxing people's income. Because if land isn't taxed, people can own it without any obligation to the rest of society. That's the problem. We need obligations on landowners, just as we have all got obligations to treat other people well, so landowners have obligations to look after wildlife on their land.
But landowners will say that you're now confiscating their land by charging them for occupying that land. Is that a fair thing to do?
Ownership of land, I think, should be protected. Landowners should be custodians of their land, and they should have a right to make money from that land. But if you hold land from other people's use and you get all the benefits of that land, that's not right. That's not what land ownership should be. The wildlife should have rights, and people should have rights to access and enjoy that land as well.
Nature gives services to humans for free. The sun, the fertility of the soil, animals that we coexist with. You're saying that we should pay a sort of rent for using those services. Is that right?
That's exactly right. We should forget about income tax and national insurance and VAT, and we should think about taxing the resources that people use, land, oil, the minerals from the ground. That is where the revenue of the government should come from.
But that means we would be able to stop taxing people's earned incomes, their wages.
That's the beauty of not having taxes on our labour, is you'll free up people's efforts. We'll have more industry. It'll create lots more jobs, especially in the countryside. If farmers' labour isn't taxed, they can look after animals much better. They can employ more people. As a charity, we could employ more people to look after our wildlife if that labour wasn't taxed. But I'd be very happy to pay a rent for the use of the land that we have and for the use of the natural resources that we use in our efforts.
I went to visit Dr. Duncan Pickard in Scotland. He is a large landowner who has surprising views on agriculture, wildlife conservation and tax reform.
Landowners should be part of the solution to the conservation issue, not the cause of the problem. We take care not to disturb wildlife on this farm. We have about 40 acres of woodland that we leave free to the wildlife. We have about a mile of riverbank, which again, we are careful not to spread fertilizer or sprays on. And the main objective is to leave wildlife to enjoy its freedom. It would be more appropriate to penalise landowners who destroy wildlife habitats rather than paying them subsidies to do nothing. Leave the wildlife to look after itself.
Farmers make a lot of money, not by farming, but just by owning the land, don't they?
Yes, because the subsidy payment is paid according to the area of land that we own. And it seems entirely wrong to me for farmers to be given non-means tested income support when they're already very wealthy.
How much can a farm landowner actually receive as an annual subsidy income?
Well, there are several farmers in Scotland who have a subsidy income of £1 million and more. There is no doubt that all subsidies eventually end up increasing the price of land, farmland in particular. And even subsidies paid for conservation increase the price of the land which is eligible for the subsidy. I would like to see the end of all subsidies.
But Dr. Pickard, you're a landowner.
Yes. Yes, but that's the system. And if I want to farm, I have to live with the system that I've got. But I prefer to make the case that I'm making from the inside of the industry rather than as an outsider shouting from the sidelines. The system currently says that the more people I employ, the more employment taxes I pay. There's no shortage of work on the farm, but the inhibitory effect of the tax system means that as soon as I employ somebody, we have to pay the government because we've done that. We own about 640 acres of farmland that must be worth about £3 million on the open market, but we'd be prepared to pay an annual rent on every acre of that land, provided the government would get rid of all the harmful taxes like income tax and VAT.
This, of course, is a beautiful fallow deer. And fallow deer aren't native to this country. They were mostly imported by the Normans, and they preferred to hunt them. And of course, what the Normans did, they were the start of one group of society monopolising the land for their own benefit. In the forests, that was a Norman word, the royal forests, they kicked all the peasants who used to live in the woodlands and live in harmony with a lot of the woodlands. The Normans kicked them all out, and they had hideous punishments. They poked people's eyes out and chopped their fingers off and arms off. They did all kinds of awful things. It was ruthless exploitation by violence. And they did this to push common people out of forests so they could bring in these beautiful fallow deer and then hunt them for their pleasure. It was about one group in society exploiting the land for their own benefit and punishing the majority. And those legal codes that were implemented are where land ownership rights started changing. And that's what caused the problem today. We need to change the legal basis of land ownership from our Norman conquerors back to a system that allowed people to share in the land and share the fruits of the land.
My name is Polly Higgins, and my concern is, in fact, we're seeing violence against the planet.
I met Polly Higgins. She's a London lawyer who has strong views about the legal protection of the environment and endangered species. What kind of rights can be created to protect species that are currently endangered?
We're standing at a very pivotal point in history. A report that was just brought out, The Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, puts the figure for 2008 for the destruction of the planet at $2.2 trillion. For 2009, the figure is $4 trillion. Our biggest problem is that currently our laws are primarily governed by property laws. And this is really what we have to change, is to move away from property laws to trusteeship laws. So rather than I own, to I owe a duty of care to this planet. And what this means in real terms is recognizing that in truth we do not have ownership over the soils and the seas and the trees. We only have ownership over that which we create, that which we build. Of course, it's all fine and well having rights. It's all fine and well being up your mountain and shouting, I have rights, I have freedoms. But if you can't enforce the duties and the obligations and the responsibilities upon those who are breaching your rights, then those rights count for nothing. And so that's why I have proposed into the United Nations an international crime of ecocide, by recognizing that the mass destruction, damage, or loss of ecosystems is a crime. We can then impose duties and obligations on individuals. Once we have that in place, people like me, lawyers, can then take prosecutions against individuals who are, whether for profit or for other motivations, going in and creating damage, destruction, or loss of ecosystems. Whether or not that's a big corporate entity that's going in and illegally logging, or whether or not it's a landowner who is basically taking away his wetlands so that he can build upon them.
A lot of people think that the charging a rent on land for everybody would mean that we would destroy our green belt and our wilderness. But this is the very opposite of what I think will happen, because wilderness areas will become of value. The green lands, the wild lands are the cheapest land, and so developers are trying everything to exploit this land. We're destroying wild land. This will change completely with a rental charge on land, and we will actually start valuing wild land. It will have an inherent benefit, and as soon as you can build a house on that land, it will then become an expensive piece of land to own, so people will stop trying to exploit our wilderness areas, and we'll save our green places for our future generations.
Our goal should be a tax of 100% or close to 100% on the rents associated with those natural resources.